Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take these incredibly dense documents, in this case, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, and really try to turn them into something useful for you.
Exactly. We're continuing our series trying to make the whole MPEP structure more accessible. It's all about understanding the why behind the rules, not just, memorizing them.
Absolutely. And before we really get into it, we have to give a huge thank you to Mike Shepard. He's the creative director who organized this entire audio series.
His vision is really what makes all of this possible, taking something so complex and putting it into a format like this.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is. So our focus today is very, very specific, but it's also fundamental. We're looking at the rules for how legal representation changes before the USPTO.
So who gets to talk to the Patent Office?
Precisely. We're diving into the revocation of power of attorney and the withdrawal of attorney. It's all about making sure the USPTO knows with total certainty who has the authority to act.
Because if the wrong person sends a letter, your entire patent application could just disappear. It's about maintaining the integrity of the whole system.
That's the core of it.
Okay, so let's unpack this. For that relationship between an inventor and their lawyer to even start, what does the USPTO need to see? What makes a power of attorney valid in the first place?
It really just boils down to registration. The attorney or the agent, they have to be registered to practice before the USPTO. It's all laid out in the regulations.
And there are different levels to that registration now, right? I'm thinking of the design patent distinction.
Yes, that's a key point. If a practitioner is registered specifically as a design patent practitioner, well, their authority is limited. They can only handle design patent matters.
They can't jump over and start prosecuting a utility patent.
No, absolutely not. Whereas the general patent practitioners, they can handle everything. Utility, plant, design, all of it. It's the USPTO's way of ensuring, people stay in their lane, competency-wise.
Makes sense. So, okay, you have a registered practitioner. What about the other side? Who actually has the authority to give that power of attorney?
That authority lies with the applicant for the patent. Or if the patent has already issued, the patent owner?
An applicant isn't always as simple as just the inventor's name, is it?
Not at all. And that's where people get tripped up. The applicant could be the inventor, sure, but it could also be an assignee, like a company they work for, or someone who can show they have a real financial stake in the invention.
So if I invent something, but my employment agreement says my company, let's say Medical Corps, owns it.
The Medical Corps is the applicant. They're the one signing the power of attorney for the law firm. The PTO is always looking at who has the legal standing right now.
And for big companies, they often use a customer number to centralize things.
Exactly. They can associate a whole group of practitioners with one customer number. They all get appointed. They all get the notifications from the office.
Which is very efficient until that power gets revoked. And then everyone on that list gets the notice that their authority is gone.
Instantly.
So let's go there. Let's talk about the end of the relationship. What happens when it's time to part ways? You have two paths. The client fires the lawyer, or the lawyer quits.
Right.
Let's start with the client. The revocation of power of attorney. How does that work?
That one's pretty straightforward. It's the client's absolute right. The applicant or the patent owner can revoke a prior POA and appoint someone new pretty much at any time. The MPP just lays out the paperwork you have to file.
Okay, simple enough. Now for the methy one. The lawyer wants out. Withdrawal of attorney. Why would that happen, and what does the lawyer have to tell the USPTO?
Well, the rules cover both permissive withdrawal, where the lawyer can leave, and mandatory withdrawal, where they must leave, usually for an ethical reason. In either case, they have to file a request, and this is the key part, briefly state the reason.
Wait, hold on. They have to state the reason. That sounds problematic. What if the reason is that the client stopped paying their bills, or is asking them to do something unethical? Isn't that confidential?
It is, and that is the administrative tightrope. You have the office's need for a reason clashing directly with the attorney's duty of confidentiality to their client.
So how does that get resolved? How do you tell the USPTO, my client isn't paying me, without, telling them my client isn't paying me?
You use professional, generalized language. The MPP guidance basically resolves this by allowing practitioners to cite a high-level reason. Instead of getting into the specifics, they'll say something like, irreconcilable differences.
Irreconcilable differences. And the USPTO just accepts that.
They do. Their goal isn't to judge the dispute between the lawyer and the client.
I see.
The point is just to make sure the client isn't being abandoned for no good reason and to get the change formalized on the record.
So it's more of a procedural checkmark than an investigation.
Exactly. And the lawyer's duties don't just end when they file that paper. They have to take steps to protect the client's interests.
What does that mean, practically?
It means giving the client reasonable notice to find a new lawyer, handing over all the files and papers they're entitled to, and critically refunding any unearned fees. You can't just drop a case right before a major deadline.
Okay, now let's get to the situation that I think confuses everyone the most.
Yeah.
Ownership changes.
Yes. The assignment.
An inventor gets their patent and then sell that patent, the whole thing, to a big corporation. Does selling the patent automatically fire the original lawyer?
This is one of the most important points in this whole section, and the answer is a clear and simple no.
No, that seems so counterintuitive. The original inventor doesn't even earn it anymore. Why would their lawyer still be the one on record?
It's purely a procedural safeguard. The MPP says it very clearly. An assignment will not, by itself, operate as a revocation of power.
So you need two separate actions, one to sell the property, another to change the driver.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Think about it. If the POA was automatically revoked, you'd have this dangerous gap, a period where the patent is sold, but the new owner hasn't appointed anyone yet.
And during that time, no one would be authorized to respond to the patent office. The application could go abandoned.
Precisely. The rule prevents that from happening. It ensures there's always someone with the authority to act.
So what does the new owner, the corporation that just bought the patent, have to do to take control?
It's a two-step process. First, they have to prove to the USPTO that they are, in fact, the new owner. They file the assignment documents and establish their right to prosecute.
They show the deed, basically.
Correct. And only after the USPTO recognizes them as the new owner can they then take the second step, formally revoking the old power of attorney and appointing their own.
So it's an active, intentional process. You can't just assume it happens.
You can't. That separation ownership transfer versus authority transfer is what gives the whole system its integrity. It guarantees continuity.
When you lay it all out like that, you can see how all these technical rules are really just there to keep the process orderly.
They have to be. Imagine the chaos if the patent office was constantly trying to figure out whose instructions to follow during a corporate merger or a sale.
And you see this need for clarity really ramp up as a patent gets closer to being issued.
Oh, absolutely. The need for finality becomes critical. You see it in other rules, too. For example, the inventor's oath or declaration has to be filed no later than when the issue fee is paid.
Tying everything up with a bow right at the end.
Yes. The office needs to know with absolute certainty who the inventors are, who the applicant is, and who is authorized to represent them before they grant that final property right.
So whether it's an attorney citing irreconcilable differences or a new company having to file two sets of paperwork, it all comes back to a single principle.
Clear written documentation. The USPTO has to have a clear record for any party to be able to act.
So what's the big takeaway here for you, the listener? Well, these seemingly dry rules about power of attorney are actually vital checks and balances. They ensure the USPTO always knows exactly who was speaking for an invention.
And that certainty is what upholds the integrity of the whole system, especially when things get complicated, like when ownership changes hands.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. These rules show that even in this world of, incredible innovation, the most important relationships can come down to very clear separation procedures. So here's the question. How much clarity do these detailed rules really save the patent office versus how much complexity do they add for the average inventor just trying to navigate the system?
And before we wrap up, I do have to read our standard disclaimer. This summary of the MPEP was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and Notebook LM, and may contain errors or omissions. It is provided for general educational and informational purposes only and is not legal advice or a substitute for formal instruction. For authoritative guidance, consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor, or a registered patent practitioner.
An excellent and necessary point. Join us next time on The Deep Dives. Until then, keep digging.